What misery! What terrible disappointment! I wanted to die of despair, the distraught young woman wrote in her diary after the wedding night. Belgian Princess Stephanie's hopes for a successful marriage and a happy family life were shattered by the harsh reality. Stephanie was born on May 21, 1864, and was the third of 4 children of King Leopold II of Belgium and his wife Marie Henriette. A very unfortunate relationship had developed between Stephanie's parents in which there was no room for true love. King Leopold has gone down in history as a man who carried out a horrific genocide, which is not surprising given that researchers believe he had the blood of 10 or 15 million people on his hands. Wanting to ensure the prosperity of his subjects, he pushed hard to acquire a colony for Belgium. The Belgian king's choice fell on the Congo in Central Africa, but Parliament did not approve the colonization of the country, so Leopold II took on this ambitious undertaking as a private citizen. In 1885, he became the ruler of the Congo Free State. Leopold ruled brutally and ran a plundering economy, mining rubber and ivory in the Congo. The local population was not happy with the new power. The Belgian king did them no good. They were forced to do hard slave labor in terrible conditions in exchange for meager food, and any sign of disobedience was punished very severely. Their hands, feet, ears, noses, or whips were cut off. The slightest sign of rebellion was punishable by death for all inhabitants of the village from which the rebel originated. Modern researchers estimate that during King Leopold's reign, the indigenous population of the Congo was halved. The cruel ruler was not at all interested in his children, and worse, his wife also did not show them warmth and maternal love, devoting more time to her favorite horses. Marie Henriette of Austria was very strict with her 4 daughters and only son, ordering nannies and tutors to use corporal punishment on them. The Queen of Belgium was truly convinced that this was the only way to prepare children for the hardships of adulthood. Stephanie's childhood was generally difficult, and it is amazing how this little girl was not embittered by the world, but showed the usual childlike naivety and hope for a happy future. She dreamed of marriage, a handsome husband, and children of her own, whom she would in no way corporally punish. In the 19th century, one of Europe's most enviable suitors was Archduke Rudolf of Austria, son of Emperor Franz Joseph and Elizabeth of Bavaria. His childhood was by no means carefree either. Rudolf was born August 21, 1858. He was brought up by his grandmother, Archduchess Sophia, preparing her grandson for the burden of imperial power. Rudolf was characterized by good physical health, but like many members of the Bavarian family, had a mental disorder. Rudolf rarely saw his parents. Emperor Franz Joseph was busy with politics, and his beautiful wife Elizabeth, who delighted all of Europe, was rarely at home, as her passion was traveling. However, she was not very interested in married life either. Elizabeth readily ceded her duties in the alcove to her husband's favorite, the actress Katharina Schratt, who was not very beautiful but had a hot temperament. Rudolf could not count on the love of his eternally absent mother, and his father was an advocate of strict upbringing of children, especially boys, and considered the manifestation of warm feelings for his son unacceptable. As a result, Rudolf grew up nervous and mentally unstable, loved alcohol and the society of courtesans, who probably infected him with venereal disease. On May 10, 1881, Rudolf married the Belgian princess Stephanie Clotilde. Stephanie was happy to become the wife of such a statuesque, handsome man, which is the dream of many women. She called him a stallion. But somehow family life did not work out. Stephanie realized that there would be no room for love in this marriage. Rudolf indulged his weaknesses and was often seen in the company of ladies. Already after the first wedding night, Stephanie expressed her disappointment in her personal diary. She wrote, "What a night. What anguish. What a terrible disappointment. I had no idea of what lay before me." Rudolf was a neurasthenic, irascible, but at the same time apathetic man. Elizabeth of Bavaria did not like Stephanie. The Empress thought her daughter-in-law bony and called her a garaffe. Stephanie was considered promiscuous, clumsy, and lacking good taste. Mentally weak and sensitive, Rudolf needed a strong woman by his side who could support and guide him. But Stephanie was not like that. She herself needed help and support. The innocent princess was unable to understand the thicket of court intrigue and gossip. She despised public appearances as, due to her inexperience and uncertainty, she often got into embarrassing situations. Her mother-in-law, Empress Elizabeth of Bavaria, had herself experienced in her youth the hostility and constant criticism of Franz Joseph's mother and court circle. But when Elizabeth became a mother-in-law, she did not show her daughter-in-law an ounce of sympathy and compassion. Perhaps Stephanie would have been able to bear the ridicule if Rudolf had feelings for her. As soon as the only child of the couple, Archduchess Elizabeth Maria, was born, the spouses were estranged from each other completely. Elizabeth of Bavaria was not surprised that her son cheated on his wife with other women, in her opinion, more worthy of his attention than stupid and ugly Stephanie. Stephanie had to accept the presence of other women in her husband's life, and did so almost from the day they were married. Rudolf had several distinguished women whose stories have survived to this day. At first he wanted to give up the throne for marriage to the Polish aristocrat Countess Clementine Potocka, and then a greedy woman with the surname Orachevska appeared in his life. Orachevska was not going to retreat into the shadows, and not at all because of her affection for the Archduke. In this affair, she saw her own benefit. And when Orachevska was asked not to interfere in the married life of Rudolf and Stephanie, the insolent girl demanded 1,000,000 marks for her disappearance. The imperial family agreed. And the former favorite of the Archduke, equipped with the appropriate check, went to Paris, where she led a very free and luxurious life. Following Orachevska in 1888, in the life of Rudolf appeared pretty Madame Rdzivowska. Quite a scandalous surname, considering that the adventurous Karolina Sobanska and Ewelina Ganska, wife of Honor de Balzac, were both born Rzawoski. As a result of this love affair, Stephanie contracted gonorrhea from her husband and became subsequently infertile, although she was able to give birth to one child. The Viennese court was set against Stephanie, indirectly blaming her for the lack of male heirs. The only person who could openly recognize that the responsibility for this state of affairs lies with the heir to the throne was his father. The emperor openly let his offspring know what he thought of his behavior, and as punishment began to remove Rudolf from politics and public affairs, which further deteriorated the relationship between father and son. Rudolf found solace in alcohol and short-term romances. As the years passed, he became increasingly suffocated in a marriage imposed upon him by his family and dynastic duties. As they say, the apple didn't fall far from the tree, considering that his mother Elizabeth had fled the country altogether, having gone wandering around Europe. Realizing that his father would never agree to a divorce, Rudolf secretly asked the Pope to annul the marriage. The emperor, of course, found out about everything in January 1889 and became furious. Franz Joseph publicly scolded his son and told him that one cannot annul a relationship made before God and men just because someone is unhappy in it. The Archduke ran out of the meeting agitated, declaring that he knew what he should do now. Apparently, even then he decided to commit suicide and persuaded to do the same young Baroness Mary Wetzera, who fell in love with him. On January 29, 1889, shortly after Rudolf met the emperor, the Archduke took Baroness Mary Wetzera, who was unconditionally in love with him, on a hunting trip from which they never returned. The next day their bodies were found in the castle of Mayerling. After the tragedy, the Viennese court was in mourning, and the emperor could not come to terms with the loss of his son, who not only committed suicide but also persuaded a young girl to do so. Elizabeth of Bavaria held herself responsible for her son's death and wore mourning for the rest of her life. Stephanie was 25 years old at the time of Rudolf's death. She was in despair, blaming herself for her coldness with her husband, and at the same time began to dream of the life she'd been deprived of in her marriage. Even before the terrible tragedy, Stephanie had hope of finding happiness. The emperor often held a ball attended by the Polish nobility. Usually the emperor or archduke would dress in white and red colors to pay their respects to guests. Archduchess Stephanie also attended the ball in a rather unusual outfit. She wore a white dress with a train of red velvet. While still married in the spring of 1883, Archduchess Stephanie met the Polish nobleman Arthur Potocki. She came with Rudolf on an official visit to Krakow. The couple enjoyed the Count's hospitality at his estate in Kashishevitsi, but at the time there was not yet a love spark between Stephanie and Potocki, as the wife of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was pregnant. Rudolf had known Potocki for many years. Moreover, the Polish aristocrat was even considered one of the Archduke's closest friends. It was said that they shared a love of ornithology. They also often hunted together, and it is suspected that the heir to the throne sometimes borrowed money from the Count because Artur Potocki was a very wealthy man and, more importantly, was able to increase his asset. Potocki had vast estates and also managed the estates of his relatives, managing a total of 3 million morgen of land. Potocki did his job well. He established a modern fish farm on the Kshyshovitsi estate and founded very successful marble and coal mines, as well as zinc smelters, distilleries, breweries, and brickyards. Potocki also took care of his employees. In 1883, he drew up a statute under which all employees of the estate, as well as their widows and children, received a pension. Somehow, the enterprising aristocrat also found time for social and political activities. He served as president of the Krakow Agricultural Society as well as the Krakow Insurance Society and was a member of the National Sejm, taking an active part in the following committees: budget, fisheries, and floods. He was a frequent speaker on matters relating to river regulation, land reclamation, public finance, and road and railroad construction. Potocki also participated in government commissions in Vienna. In all this, he possessed personal qualities. It was said that he possessed charm and the ability to win sympathy and inspire confidence. He did not seek out people, but wherever he met them, he won them over and attracted them with the magnetism of his noble nature. Needless to say, Stephanie liked such an active man much more than her mentally unstable husband. It would seem that the Count was a fortunate man, but if in politics, on the farm, and in business he succeeded, in his personal life he was unhappy. In 1877, Arthur married Anna Lubomirsky, by whom he had 3 daughters. Sadly, his wife died in 1881 and his youngest daughter died shortly afterward. Arthur Potocki was a young widower who had just turned 31. Many girls were ready to brighten his loneliness, but in the life of a busy count, there was no room for love. Until he met Stephanie. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and his wife graced Krakow with their presence for the second time on June 28, 1887. After the official reception, the guests went to the palace belonging to the Potocki family, where they met with representatives of the Polish nobility. The master of the house, of course, was Artur Potocki, assisted by his mother, 62-year-old Katarina Bernicka. It is worth noting that the cellars of the Potocki Palace were famous for excellent Rhine and Hungarian wines, as well as sweet Greek and Italian wines, especially popular with the ladies of the court. Stephanie was universally admired in Krakow, although she was so disliked in Vienna. People admired her beauty and elegance. It was written that Stephanie moved like a queen with a smile on her face. The Polish aristocrats and dignitaries attending the dinner at the palace courted Stephanie as much as etiquette and good manners allowed for such a high dignitary. Meanwhile, the master of the house, Arthur Potocki, was already enchanted by the Archduchess. The young count was lonely, and indeed Stephanie felt the loneliness of an unhappy marriage. It is not known the details of how their romance began. The lovers kept their relationship a secret from everyone. Moreover, Stephanie almost took this secret to the grave. It was not until 100 years later that Stephanie's letters to her sister Maria Louisa were discovered, revealing the truth. Of course, that neither Rudolf nor his family, nor Stephanie's father did not guess that the Belgian princess had an affair on the side. Stephanie wrote to her sister that she did not want to return to the hated Vienna, as there she would be tormented by a longing for Hamlet, as she called Arthur Potocki. For Stephanie, Arthur Potocki became the ideal man who slipped out of her hands, and it was ruthlessly snatched from the hands of a woman in love by death itself. Shortly after Stephanie and Arthur began their affair, the death of Archduke Rudolf followed. After a few days of despair, Stephanie came to her senses and wrote to her sister that now, as a free woman, she could fully devote herself to Arthur Potocki. Indeed, there was nothing to prevent Stephanie from remarrying after mourning. By deciding to remarry, Stephanie automatically ceased to be a member of the House of Habsburg, but she did not care. She loved neither the family nor Vienna. Stephanie was impatient to finally bind herself to Arthur with the official ties of marriage. There was a stormy correspondence. However, the lovers were not destined to find happiness. One day, Stephanie received a sad letter. Arthur Fotocki passed away. He had throat cancer. He died at the age of 39 in 1890 in his beloved Kashishevitsi. Stephanie was out of her mind with despair. She wanted to come at least to her lover's funeral since her dead husband Rudolf was Arthur's friend, and this visit would not arouse suspicion. But Emperor Franz Joseph forbade his daughter-in-law to leave Vienna. Stephanie could only send a wreath of snow-white roses and red camellias, the colors of the Polish flag and coat of arms. Stephanie missed him greatly. She thought she didn't deserve a happy family life. It was not until 10 years later, in March 1900, that Stephanie remarried. Her husband became Hungarian Count, with whom the Belgian princess lived for 45 years. The King of Belgium was disappointed with his daughter's marriage, considering it a mésalliance. The couple lived happily, but it is not known whether Stephanie loved her second husband, a Hungarian count, as much as she loved the Polish aristocrat Arthur Potocki. Anyway, Stephanie was able to keep the affair a secret for almost 100 years. It turned out that Stephanie is not such a loser and a bad girl as her husband and mother-in-law thought her to be.